stand together, we'll never fall.
Podcast. My name is Rob Kaiser, and I am your host. Today is Sunday, February 26th, 2023, and this is episode number 496 of the show. And the title of today's show is Finding My Religion. Without just diving right into this topic, I first of all want to say a big thank you to Lettie Lou from the Liberty All Day blog, who originally wrote an article titled this, Finding My Religion. And we are going to take a look at that article in depth here in just a second. But it was because she wrote that article and she shared so openly her own experiences with regard to her spiritual path that inspired me to do the same. For those of you who do not know, this show is titled All Around Growth. And the reason it is titled All Around Growth is because I am of the belief that in order to grow and develop as human beings in this life, that we have to find balance in 7 different areas of life: financial, physical, personal development, family, spiritual, social, and career. Sometimes in that order, sometimes not. But for the purposes of this show, we go through them in that order and rotate through topics. At least that's what we've been doing lately. This brings us to this topic, spiritual. And it is. Hi, Sean. Hi, Lettie. Thanks for tuning in. And it is time to get uncomfortable. But, quite frankly, guys, it's uncomfortable talking about this because this is not something I've openly shared about. But I do believe growing in life and working towards this thing that we call all around growth or personal growth and development, whatever it is that you want to call it, developing and evolving as humans requires us to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I don't know if what Lettie wrote about made her uncomfortable, but in this episode, I'm going to share bits and pieces of what she wrote and kind of reflect on that because there's a lot of her story that resonates with me and mine. And then I'm going to share with you my journey and why I chose to basically mimic the title of her article as a title for this show. And the reason I want to do that is simply to share my experience with my own spiritual journey, which, quite frankly, at this point, as of February 26, 2023, is a journey that has lasted for well over 3 decades. All right. 30 years of searching and trying to find something. And the short answer is I don't have an answer. But one thing I've realized is that I was asking the wrong questions. Okay. So before we kind of get into the philosophical deep waters there, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the things that Lettie wrote here. And I think that it's going to be beneficial to do this in order to provide a little bit of context for, and also just to get my gears grinding. Okay. So she writes that she's had a calling to go back to the church this year, and that she is not the only one who is in that boat either. I know I am. I know that there are several people out there in the audience who have. I know that there are people out there in the audience who have not, or people out there not in the audience who are in the same boat. I don't know what it is but I believe that there's a lot of people out there who are seeking right now. Okay. And whether or not they are explicitly seeking to cultivate a relationship within the church or not, I don't know, but they are longing for something. And I think that that something can be found within a church. And we're going to talk about my experiences today with a lot of different churches. And, like she wrote, a lot of us are in the same boat, inside the audience, outside the audience. She writes that some people are coming back to the Catholic Church. Some people are starting their journeys as Catholics. Some are other forms of Christian, and it doesn't matter which denomination. We all feel this calling. I wholeheartedly agree with this statement. And if I was doing a little bit more or better preparatory work, I would inject this photo that Sean shared with me about denominations. And Sean, if you're out there, feel free to drop a link or something and share that photo or resend it to me, and I'll see if I can't get it, share it, because it's not about the church, right? The reason why I say that is churches are institutions of and formed by humans, and we are all imperfect beings. And I believe that what we need to do in this world is to seek a relationship with a higher power. And I am of the opinion that one can do that, that church provides an environment that's conducive to that. And as a Christian, I I feel comfortable doing that within the church. But like Lettie wrote, I don't believe the particular denomination matters, because more often than not, when we start talking about individual denominations, we end up in this back and forth argument about who's right and who's wrong, and what's right and what's not. And we end up talking about matters of doctrine, which at the end of the day, if we actually look into these things, which I actively am, some of these matters of doctrine and the contributing factors to the rifts and the division within the church that led to the initiation or beginnings of some of these separate denominations were actually quite minute. All right. And some may argue that point. That's okay. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to share my experience. And I think that if we can put our differences aside, we will find that we all have more in common than that which we disagree upon. So moving forward, as Lettie writes, she can't always explain it, but something clicked and is pulling her to the church. She's always said bedtime prayers with her children, doesn't always say grace at meals, just at holidays. And she hadn't been to an actual mass in person in ages. And she writes that that doesn't really matter, but she's made it a priority to engage in some activities like the rosary and things like this. And guys, if you want to read this article for yourself, because I'm just taking bits and pieces of it, I've definitely linked to it in the show notes. And if you haven't read her article, I would actually encourage you to pause this video, go ahead, read the article. And if you're listening, it's going to be in the show notes as well. So take a moment, pause, read her article, read it in depth, and come back and check in with me once you've done so. Because again, like I said, it's her article that inspired me to engage in this dialogue in the first place. So she got back to some habits that she had previously done, it sounds like, due to her being raised Roman Catholic, and the it struck a chord with me because I was raised Roman Catholic, and I'll get to that in a little bit. She also linked to some things, tools, resources online that she's using to explore and grow her faith. Catechism in a Year podcast by Father Mike. And this is something where he spends the year reading through and explaining the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And, she's getting a lot of value out of this. And if Catholicism is something that you're interested in, um, I think that that would be something worth looking into. I trust Lettie. I appreciate the work that she does. I sure do appreciate the inspiration that this has provided to me, and with regard to this episode, and just all of the spiritual talk in general. So, check it out. She there's a lot that she, Catechism in a Year podcast, and also a daily mass on YouTube from St. Thomas the Apostle in West Springfield. So there's a couple resources there. I've linked to her article, which outlines all of this in the description in the show notes. You are welcome to and encouraged to check it out. But both her and her husband are reading from devotionals that they picked up. Her husband wasn't raised religious, or is not religious. He wasn't raised in any particular denomination, and you know they've come to grips with that. They have worked out a lot of the differences. It sounds like in their own spiritual lives, and that is important to me because it sounds like she can see him coming into his own and finding his own path as he is seeking something that many of us all are. Now, one thing that she wrote is that the only thing that she's missing is a church home. As I get into this talk and get into this a little bit, I'm going to talk about how I eventually found a church home and how I am actively working on finding a new church home. Okay, because that's all part and parcel of my journey. So you can read more about her journey there in this article. And there's more links and resources that talk about the journey within Catholicism that she wrote about. And she writes about going to some of these churches and feeling uncomfortable and simply deflated, and spending a lot of time contemplating whether or not she should attend mass at other churches within the vicinity where she lives. I can definitely identify with that, and I will get into that in just a little bit. There is a lot here that resonates with me, but what she writes is that she's looking for something that's a better fit for her and what she wants, and what she really is looking for is a long drive away. And so what she's going to do is simply keep on doing what she's doing and continue the search for a church home. And for anybody and everyone out there that is feeling lost in your way, or whatever the case may be, I would encourage you to do the same. And the reason that this struck such a chord with me, the reason her article struck such a chord with me is I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church. Okay. And I went to a Catholic grade school, and I went through many of the sacraments that we do as children in the church. And around seventh and eighth grade, especially in the eighth grade, I started becoming one of these rebellious kids, for a number of reasons. I mean, I have epilepsy that first presented itself to me in my life when I was 13. Didn't really understand what was going on with that, didn't really understand why. I also was developing as a young man, thinking about things, having questions about what we were doing within the church, why we did certain things, and I wasn't having the questions answered in a manner that I thought was appropriate. I found much of it to be, this is how it is because this is the way it is, and that's how it is. And I didn't really find that satisfactory. But being a kid and expressing this to my parents, I was told that as long as you live in this house until you're an adult at the age of 18, you will go to church with us. And reluctantly, I did. I got a lot of feed, or my parents rather, got a lot of feedback from teachers in school about things that I was doing. Um, and I was just doing dumb things like writing Nuke the Whales on my book covers and things like that. And I really wasn't, you know, doing wearing Bart Simpson t-shirts to school on dress down day, things of that nature. I wasn't really, that exceptionally of a rebellious kid at that time. That rebellion later in high school and whatnot contributes to my own what became a spiritual malady of sorts, let's say. All right. And basically, I continued going to church until I was 18. Um, at that time, I had already begun drinking and using drugs and doing a lot of things that we do in high school. And that pattern continued in college. And in college, um, yeah, yeah, that kind of thing. That happens, as long as we're kids, we gotta do what our parents say. And I did that until I didn't have to. And when I went to college, I this whole spiritual journey just it stopped. I mean, I went to college number 1 on a partial football scholarship. That didn't work out. I didn't like playing college ball. I left college number 1, went to college number 2, started studying philosophy and English, expanding my mental fortitude and really enjoying classes like symbolic logic and learning how to think differently and really began engaging in pretty 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 healthy psychedelic use. All right, I'm just going to be frank about it. So, you know guys, if you've got young ones that are listening, I'm not going to do too many deep dives into things that are maybe not appropriate for young ears, but there will be some discussion of that because that relates to my journey about spirituality and the seeking of it. And but at that time, that wasn't really on the forefront of my mind, although I did have a number of experiences which I deemed uh, somewhat along the spiritual lines that began opening up something or revealing something to me that kind of felt like a void. So even in my early 20s, as in short, college number 2 didn't really work out. All right, because of everything that I just mentioned, and I dropped out and eventually went into a deep depression that lasted for a considerable amount of time. Um, well over a month, couple of months, went to a number of therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, was diagnosed as manic depressive at that time. and was on all sorts of antipsychotic meds and things like that. And it was at this time that because I was so unhappy and just feeling unfit mentally, spiritually, socially, not so much physically, but I was not well. And at this time, I was going back to churches, but anything but the Roman Catholic Church. I found myself going to different denominations of, um, Protestant churches and Episcopalian churches. And that was one that, resonated with me. The church at that time was, I believe, St. Barnabas. I was living with my parents, and that was not too far from us. And it was basically, it was like the Catholic Church, but not. For those of you who aren't overly familiar with the Episcopalian Church, you can think of it as Catholic light. And I like that. That worked for me until it didn't, right? And that's how it always was. Things worked for me until they didn't. I was always looking for, unknowingly looking back, I would attend until I found some kind of flaw, and then I used it as an excuse to stop going and take my life in different directions. Ultimately, I needed to go back to school at some point, or so I thought, because that's what I thought everybody wanted. That's what I thought was going to make people in my life happy. So that's what I did. I ended up going to the Ohio State University Agricultural Technical Institute in Wooster, Ohio, and ultimately an internship there took me out. It didn't take me out west, but I realized I had an opportunity to go wherever I wanted. And unlike a lot of other people who went to school there, I chose to intern with one of the four largest companies in the green industry at that time, and capitalized on an opportunity to head west to Colorado and work in uh, or work at a tree farm as part of the landscaping division of one of these four largest companies. At that time, my my experimentation with uh, psychedelics really escalated, and I found myself spending a lot of time um, up in the mountains, a lot of time alone, and a lot of time, seeking and right. Like some kind of vision quest, like I'm some sort of you know uh, ancient sage guru in the training. But hey, that's part of the deal. That's what I did, and by this time, based on a lot of the schooling that I had, in addition to philosophy and English, I was also interested in Eastern culture. I had taken a couple courses in Chinese and really gained an interest in Taoism, and was reading several key books in Taoist philosophy. I don't personally consider Taoism a religion. I consider more of it a philosophical thought train. The two books that I read the most were the Tao Te Ching and the Hua Hu Ching. And I read many different translations of each book, and one of the best translations that I found was written by Thomas Cleary, and you can find a compilation of those books in a singular book called The Essential Tao. And that was something that I spent a lot of time exploring. I spent a lot of time reading about, thinking about, and basically reached a point in my life where I realized that um, God was Tao, but Tao was not God. All right. So this idea, this concept has stuck with me for 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 a long time. And at this point, I'm in my early 20s. I'm in Colorado, and from time to time, I'm still feeling some empty void within me. I'll go to a church here and there, and you know, same old, same old. I'll have some negative experience, some negative encounter. I'll hear something I don't like and say, "Oh, to hell with that. I've had enough of this." And and then I wouldn't. And again, like I said, the substance abuse in my life escalated to a point where the seizures and the epilepsy that I had became unmanageable. I was having a lot of seizures. I just wasn't taking care of myself. I ended up basically hitting what one might call a bottom of sorts. And that happened on account of having a seizure behind the wheel and driving into the back of a cement truck at 70 miles an hour on Interstate 25 southbound, getting cut out of the 1988 Subaru DL with the jaws or by the jaws of life, the car that I loved so much. And basically having my right arm paralyzed for an undetermined amount of time at that point in time. It basically had reached a point where I was learning how to throw a football and write with my left hand because I was uncertain if I was ever going to regain full functionality of my right arm. But eventually I did. But by this point in time, I did not have a vehicle. I ended up buying a crappy old Pontiac Grand Am. Um, or perhaps it was a Grand Prix. I'm not entirely sure, but I got a good deal on it. Had a blown head gasket, and soon enough, I had oil that looked like chocolate milk, and I was broke, and I was deeply in debt, and I didn't know what to do. So my brother and my mom, bless their hearts, came out, and we took a road trip with what little belongings I had that fit into a U-Haul 5x8 trailer, and I moved back to Ohio, where I began working at a garden center where I had begun working in 1999, selling Christmas trees. And again, um, didn't really, was basically feeling lost in life again with an even deeper hole inside of my heart than I'd ever felt before. So I tried to fill that hole with alcohol and drugs and everything else I could get my hands on, pills, whatever. I ended up getting a DUI. I ended up going, um, I ended up being court ordered to attend 12-step programs and all of this. And, it just wasn't really a high point in my life. All right. So, nevertheless, during this time, I'm going to churches, more churches, more churches. The same thing is happening time and again, time and again. Um, I'm going to Quaker churches, Friends Church. I'm going to, you name the denomination. I've probably attended some kind of service there at some point in time. And I could tell you all the flaws within it because, in my infinite wisdom, in my early mid 20s, I was so smart and I could tell you how everybody was wrong and that I just found flaws in everything except my own way of thinking and my own way of living. All right. So at some point in time, I realized that I couldn't get anywhere. I couldn't grow my career. I couldn't do much um, where I was at with this particular garden center where I worked, and I spent some time trying to figure out what I was going to do, how I was going to figure out my life, how I was going to figure out my life, and all I could figure out was that there's one thing I can do. I'm just going to walk the Appalachian Trail. I'm going to go northbound and spend 4 months walking, and that's the key. That's how I'm going to figure it all out. So I started planning for that. Was dehydrating food, was reading books and research. This was kind of long before the internet, and so I'm going to the library, reading books on how to do this, and I assure you that this all ties into the finding my religion story. And while I'm doing this, I'm still attending church, still finding flaws in everything, still realizing that everyone is wrong, I'm right, everyone's stupid, I'm smart, and um, but I'm going to figure it all out while taking a multi-month expedition and just walking trails. So I decided that, yeah, I was going to do this, and I had food stores ready and gear. I had gear galore from my days in Colorado. And, you know, one thing that's also worth mentioning is, in addition to this DUI I went through a bankruptcy in my early 20s. My life was a train wreck at that point in time. And because my life was out of control, again, I'm seeking something to find some sort of stability. So I'm not realizing this, but I'm always going back to the church. I'm always going back to the church. And at this point, when I the church, I'm saying a church. I'm exploring different churches. I'm exploring different denominations. I just continue this pattern. Okay. And but at the same time, because I was court ordered to a 12-step program for the first time in my life, I actually maintained some kind of length of sobriety. All right. So, um, for a year and a half, I was thinking somewhat clearly, and and I took a I took a trip down to North Carolina. I had a friend living there, and he he invited me down and said, "Hey, I'll drop you off at the Nantahala Outdoor Center, and you can hike for a week." We kind of coordinated this, and then I'll pick you up at a trailhead, uh, you know, northbound a week later. I didn't even get a chance to do that. First day down, I broke my ankle, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, that threw off my or my plans to do that. And that was in a walking cast. So I just decided, oh, hell, I might as well just move there. All right. I mean, I fell in love with the place. I also started exploring old time music, and realized that, hey, I can go live there. I can learn old time in the place that I loved from the people that I loved. I can engage in this tradition. I can engage in this lifestyle. And that's exactly what I did. So I moved to North Carolina, moved to Western North Carolina. Initially lived in Swannanoa, which is between Asheville and Black Mountain, and lived there for a while before moving into West Asheville. And again, at this time, I am still seeking. I'm still going to churches. I'm still I'm still trying to fill that void. but I'm always finding something wrong. I'm at Unitarian churches, you name it, man. I went there, but there was always something wrong with the church, right? Or the people, or the pastor, or the priest, or the nuns, or whatever. So I'm going here, I'm going there, I'm finding a problem here, I'm finding a problem there, I'm finding a problem with you, I'm finding a problem with everyone else around me. And you know, so to make a long story short, I stopped engaging in the positive behaviors that I was engaging in. I started doing a lot of things that I used to do. And, you know, then came the advent of social media, and I saw people growing up, starting lives, having families, getting good jobs. So at that point in time, I decided to move back to Ohio. And my parents had recently purchased this land here where we live now. And we had some initial at that point in time. I was working on a farm part time, Thatchmore Farms, learning how to grow produce, learning things about mushrooms, learning things about market farming. Learning how to run a uh, a you know a BCS style tractor, little Grillo thing. And I appreciate you, Luke. Thank you for the comment. Um, and I was talking to my parents at this time, realizing that we could maybe utilize some of these skills here on this land. And so I thought, okay, I'm not real happy where I am. Uh, I'll go ahead and move back to Ohio. And at that point in time, I was 30. This was around early 2008. And I began going into career mode. Right. So for the next 6, 7, let's just call it let's just call it 10 years. All right. I worked for the Davy Tree Expert Company, worked all around the country doing project work, eventually landed out west in Southern California. Um, for 10 years, I went through a gap, a void where I didn't go to church anywhere until I got to Southern California. And, so let's just say 2008, I moved to California in 2011. So really, it was just 4 years where I broke up with my girlfriend. I'm trying to find something else. I'm going to Bible studies. Now, mind you, I'm not going to church. No, it wasn't 10 years. It wasn't 10 years. 4 years passed by. Not really actively involved in anything. Still reading a lot of spiritual books, especially books on Taoism. And I eventually find myself going back to a Bible study, finding an individual named Dr. Bill Creasy, who was a tenured professor at UCLA. And he was a literature professor who, once he gained tenure, as far as my understanding is concerned, started utilizing the Bible as his textbook of choice to talk about and study literature. And he presented the Bible in a way that was awesome to me, like a history lesson. We would look at it with maps and talk about who wrote what, when, and where, and how the stories corresponded with one another. And it was a really interesting thing. And I met somebody else at that time, um, Sean English, at a skateboarding event, who, for some reason, maybe he could see that I was seeking. I don't know how we ended up talking about this, but told me about his relationship with Christ, and he had no shame. He was very proud of it. It was an integral part of his life, and, and I developed a friendship with him. I gained a deep amount of gained a deep amount of respect for him, and, continued to go about life the way I was doing it. I ran a marathon. Sean was the MC at that event, helped me cross the finish line, shared the story of how we met as I was running and crossing the finish line. We met at a Boarding for Breast Cancer event, and just a few years later, Sean was diagnosed with cancer himself, and he passed away, uh, a few years ago in, 2019, I believe. Now, um, at any rate, um, he that was a turning point in my life where I realized that there is a man who I had a tremendous amount of respect for that had no shame, no guilt, no remorse, no feelings of anything about his own faith, and we openly discussed it, and we talked about it a lot, and that was the thing that kept him going through all of his treatment and all of the hardship and adversity that he faced in his life, and, a again, eventually from Southern California, I moved back here after hearing Jack Spirko talk and the Survival Podcast and learning about permaculture and thinking about all of its applicability to the land that my parents owned that had yet been to be developed. And I thought, we can do something. We can do something like that here. And so I came back and stumbled into a job at a local tree farm, and I proceeded to continue working on my career there. And, again, a number of years passed without without any real involvement in any kind of church or any kind of anything. But again, I go away from it. I feel a longing. I feel a void. I feel empty inside. So I return and I go to the a church just east of here in Litchfield. Sorry, just west of here in Litchfield. And it was a small church, an old church, and it was the United Church of Christ. And I really liked the people. I really liked the pastor. First time I'd been to a church with a woman pastor. Not the first time, but first one I actually felt comfortable with. So I went there until she was an interim pastor, and then they elected a new pastor, and imagine that. I didn't like the guy, so and so I left. And I didn't find any reason to connect with the community. I didn't do anything other than go about seeking my religion and my own path in my own selfish and self-serving ways, right? Um, what could all of this do for me? Like, I feel empty inside. I feel broken. I feel there's a void. What can I take from my external environment to fill that void? And and again, stopped going to that church. Didn't really. didn't really do anything for quite some time. A couple years go by. I'm still seeking. I'm still doing. I'm still finding various ways to seek, and I'm still trying to discover who and what I am. And here's a comment. All right, about perhaps my religion is in Brazil, where you can drink ayahuasca tea. Okay. Now, I'm very familiar with this. Uh, I know and have been very close to people in my life who are big fans of this. And I've engaged in synthetic derivatives of that and a myriad number of other natural and synthetic psychedelics in order to facilitate a mindset that is conducive to finding something greater than myself and connecting with the universe in these ways. And I can assure you that experiences like that will open your mind. I can assure you that experiences like that will expose you to different kinds of thought because I certainly implemented all kinds of things like that in my life over the years in order to gain insight into the vast expanse that is the universe, in order to put my finger on, or at least come closer to that which I could not find on my own. And the reality is, I don't believe in that. And I don't believe in it because of my direct experience with it. And I think that that is a viable option and perhaps a viable methodology for attempting to address something in your life. But I know that that in and of itself becomes a religion for some people who engage in the endless seeking. And that becomes such an integral part of their lives that they can't engage in the act of seeking without those substances. All right. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I'm not saying that that isn't the way, but I am saying that isn't the way. In 2019, I decided to join a church for the first time in my adult life. I had been attending churches, and after having this fallout with the local church down the road, I began the church began attending the church buffet after a while, and going here, going there. Finally, stumbled across one at the square, right downtown in the square. Also happened to be United Church of Christ, Congregational Medina UCC, and had, after some long, lengthy talks with the pastor to make sure that his interpretation and his understanding of the Bible was in line with mine, I decided to engage in that church. And I also, that was the very same year that I decided to join the volunteer organization that I am still currently an active member in. And my whole objective at that time was to engage in my community. And I was doing a number of other things and had done a number of other things at that time with regard to permaculture meetups and just community based, uh, I don't want to say activism, but community based events, participating in other people's events, just trying to be a part of my community to build skills, learn things, do stuff, network with people, all of that. And and I did become an active member in the church. I did end up hosting Financial Peace University classes there. I did serve on the council for a period of time after being asked to fill in as the interim treasurer. And accordingly, I was attending church on a regular basis there. I was getting a lot out of it. I was involved in the church. I was cultivating relationships with people. And but like I said, I was not doing this because I was trying to fill something inside myself at that time. I was doing it because I was trying to get involved in my community and I was highly successful at doing so. And I think a church is a good and valid way to be involved in your community. And that's not necessarily the wrong reason to attend a church, but it's also not necessarily perhaps the right reason to attend a church. And in this process, and over the years, I ended up experiencing this hole in my heart. Like I was hearing old familiar hymns. God, we had a great organist, Cat. We have a great organist, Kathy. I'm still a member of that church, and but I haven't been there in about a year or so, and I'll get to that in just a second. But Kathy could play organ. I would regularly attend the morning service in the small chapel, and where she played both the piano and the organ. And I loved the small, intimate setting of the chapel. But I ended up having this longing, this something that wasn't I wasn't getting what I like what I needed there. And so I ended up having more discussions with the pastor there, Pastor Luke, who I have an immense amount of respect and gratitude for. I like to think of him as a friend. I like to think of him as a spiritual brother. I like to think of him as someone who listened to me, unlike a lot of other experiences that I had elsewhere. Someone who befriended me, who could see what it was that I was doing. Someone who heard me when I was looking for more. And in 2021, early mid 2021 is when we had this discussion. And I told him that I was longing for God, right? And that I'm telling him about my experiences with Taoism and God and how the two are similar but not the same. And what I'm seeking is this cultivation of a relationship with God, a deepening connection with God. And he, we're sitting there, we're having a little micro brew, and he's listening to me, and he sits back and he gives me a look like this. For those of you who are listening out there in audio land, you're not going to see this look on my face, but he says, theosis. I said, what? And he said, yeah, Rob, what what you're looking for is theosis. And I'd never heard that word before, never was exposed to it, and but it stuck with me. And I'm a note taker. I've got notebooks everywhere. Uh, I write a lot. I write a lot on the computer, and it's just so interesting that I brought that comment up again because at this point in time, I'm seeking, and I can I continue seeking through the use of psychedelics, deep psychedelic use. All right. And increasing quantities, increasing um, dosages, increasing time frames, finding, aligning these experiences with astrological occurrences, the solstice, the equinox, a full moon, a new moon, whatever, something to sync it all up right to generate that which had never been generated before, to have the experience that I could never find. And eventually, you know, these these uh these experiences became troublesome. And what I mean by that is you can only explore so much. You can only go so far before you start to open doors that take you to dark places. And I understand that I understand the arguments that about natural plant-based medicine, natural fungal medicine. I understand all that, but let's be frank. Um, Anything and everything can be abused. And quite frankly, for those of you who are watching right now, I'm putting something up in my lip, little nicotine pouches, because uh, I abuse nicotine now and caffeine. Granted, I'm drinking coffee, decaffeinated, but these are things that I abuse. Many of us abuse cheeseburgers, fast food, artificial sweeteners. Many of us abuse people, relationships, our children, our spouses, our wives. And I'm not talking about physical abuse. I'm talking about emotional manipulation. I'm talking about selfish, self centered behavior. I'm talking about actions and activities that are wholly self serving. And we don't really understand what it is that we're doing because we have not taken active steps to engage in this lifestyle that is commiserate with what I consider to be all around growth. Now, what's worth pointing out at this time, by the time I have this discussion of theosis, we're about halfway into this show as we know it here, the All Around Growth podcast. I'm becoming increasingly aware of my desire to achieve this balance in life that I've never had, that I've always sought, but never was able to actually grasp. Life balance was always like grasping handfuls of sand. The harder I tried to hold on, the more ran out of my fingers. And that was the exact same thing that I was doing with trying to understand God, because there is no understanding of God. There is no understanding the very thing that created you and I, my dog back there sleeping on the couch itself, the materials that went into the couch, the stars in the sky, the sun, the moon, everything around us. Whether you believe the earth is flat, the earth is round, it all came from somewhere. And if you're an atheist and you believe this comes from nothing, then you can continue listening. I'm surprised you made it this far if you're listening. And if you're still listening and you're an atheist and you believe that this all comes from nothing, stems from nothing, means nothing, and when we die, we become nothing, I don't know what to tell you, because despite everything I've been through in life, including but not limited to being in a coma on account of another traumatic series of events, seizure related, 10 years ago this year, I know that there is certainly more than nothing. When you have a near death experience and you see something that I can only refer to as the white, you no longer fear death, because that white is, was, it still is to this day the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life, that cannot be matched through any kind of external influence. DMT, ayahuasca, psilocybin, mushrooms of any particular species, anything, LSD, whatever, you name it, it's all good. Um, I've tried it, and nothing can match the beauty, peace, and serenity that comes with death. Because I like to think I've gotten a taste of it, but I'm extremely grateful I'm here today to talk about it. And after this conversation with theosis, or about theosis with my pastor, the concept of that was just something that I continued to ruminate on mentally. And that was about the time where I first implemented the goal setting workbook into my life, which I may or may not have linked to in the show notes before. The goal setting workbook was a pivotal moment in my life because it helped me to compartmentalize, or look at life as in different ways: financial, physical, personal development, family, spiritual, social, career. It helped me put or look at life in a way that allowed me to set specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound goals in all of those 7 areas of life. And I began actually doing something akin to gaining traction in this whole thing called all around growth. And shortly thereafter, um, I began looking into and examining this word theosis, which Lettie writes was a word that was brought up by her uncle, who was a Carmelite priest. And she used to have very good discussions, the best discussions, as a matter of fact, about religion with him. And, I'm very grateful that this has brought back some of those memories. And hopefully, listening to this brings back some of that, because these discussions, I think, are discussions that we need to have a lot more of, because this spiritual seeking, this journey, this thing that we're all longing for is, like you said, Letty, it's something that no matter what denomination we are, it's something that we're all seeking. So many of us feel this calling, and there's a lot of ways that we go about finding the answer. But what I realized and alluded to when I first started talking is that I never found the answer because I was asking the wrong questions. So when I began exploring this idea and concept of theosis, I also stumbled across a podcast that is titled The Royal Path. And it, the way there are no coincidences in life. I had been following Vin Armani for years because of his knowledge on cryptocurrency, and a lot. We were all involved in the same circles at one point in time, and you know, ended up meeting people that at different conferences who knew him personally, and you know, the long and short of it is he married an Orthodox woman, and they moved to Saipan, which is an island in the North Mariana Islands, in early 2020, before COVID became what it was. And they had a couple of children, and he didn't really think much of it. He married into the faith. They raised their daughters in the church, and as far as I could tell, based on the discussions that he and Father Turbo Qualls and the podcast host Andrew are having, he wasn't really that interested in the Orthodox Church at all until his second daughter was born, and he began to be increasingly curious about it as the kids grew older and learned more, and he decided to learn more himself. And he went through the catechumen process, and or whatever that was, and converted. And they talked, and I found the whole. I thought it was interesting, And because I follow him on Twitter, I learned about this podcast that he was doing, this new project, because I was already familiar with Bitcoin Mystery School and a number of other uh, projects that he'd been involved in, that I'd followed and participated in. And um, because that word theosis had been mentioned in tweets and things like that, I immediately started thinking, this is odd. I'm having discussions about theosis, and this guy's talking about it. He's doing a podcast. I'm listening to it. They're talking about it. They're talking about these seemingly esoteric concepts of orthodoxy, and but at the same time, it all is interesting to me. And basically, in like the third or fourth episode, you know, they're receiving a lot of feedback on this. There seems to be a lot of people who are out there listening, expressing interest, and I think Father Turbo at some point in time mentioned, "Look, man, if you are interested in learning more about this, then go to an Orthodox church, talk to a priest, experience it." And I've always been seeking, the experience in my attempt to learn more and grow my spirituality and cultivate this relationship with God. So that's exactly what I did. Last year in March, early March, I went to an Orthodox church for the first time, and it was super bizarre. All right. Super bizarre, because a, uh, it was the church was Saint Sava Cathedral up in the Cleveland area. Stunning, beautiful old church, lots of blue, lots of icons, things that I'd never been exposed to. I got there a little early, introduced myself to the guy that was like the greeter and selling, or making candles available for the things that they do. And I said, introduced myself and said, I've never been to an Orthodox church before, and I don't know what I'm doing. I was raised Roman Catholic, and but I don't want to be out of line here, or be inappropriate or do anything. And he said, all right, well, it's cool. If you were raised Catholic, like, there's a lot of similarities, but there's some differences too. So just follow along. Like, gave me some literature and said, this is, the services are performed in Old Church Slavonic, which is kind of like the equivalent of a Latin mass in the Roman Catholic Church. And he said, just, stand when people stand, sit when people sit. And, I mean, you're not in the church, so you can't take communion, but um, you you can fully participate in the service. And um, I will communicate to the priest that you are here, and if you would like to speak to him afterwards. And I said, yeah, that would that would be great. And afterwards, it was a very long service. It happened to be the very first service that I attended, happened to be the Sunday of Orthodoxy, which happens to be next Sunday, the first Sunday in Great Lent. And um, and thus began my journey of the Orthodox Church. And since then, I've basically pulled up Orthodox Church on the calendar, and just to show you guys what I have done in this search, I have pulled up. I would do something like this: Orthodox Church, and I'd look at a map, and I would do this, and you can see that there's a number of Orthodox churches in the area. And home is right here, right? Here we are, York Meadow Farm. And now I've got to do a little bit of driving, but within 45, 30 to 40-minute drive, there are a number, dozens of Orthodox churches. So basically, I began working my way down the list. I would go to St. Thomas. I would go to Presentation of Our Lord. I would go to St. George. I would go to I've not been to this one yet. I've been to St. Demetrius. I've been to St. Paul. Been to St. Innocent. There's some I continue to go to. Some the one I went to the most was, Saint Sava here, and this is what Saint Sava looks like. It is a stunning church with big banquet halls and lots of things going on, lots of traditions that I don't understand. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful things that I have never really experienced ever in my life. And I was blown away with the fact that there were no pews, there was nothing. There was this whole new wild experience, and it was, and the fact that I had felt so welcome there was astonishing. And almost every church I went to was so welcoming, so accepting, and moreover, it was welcoming in the fact that I had all kinds of questions, and all questions were entertained. Nothing was inappropriate or unacceptable. But the language barrier was a bit of an issue, because many of these churches, all right, so for those who don't and aren't familiar, and again, I'm no expert, but for those of you who aren't overly familiar with the Orthodox Church, you've got the Greek Orthodox Church, you've got the Serbian Orthodox Church, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, the Romanian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Antiochian Orthodox Church, the Coptic Orthodox Church, which is like Oriental Orthodox versus Eastern Orthodox, and we won't get into that right now, but maybe I'll discuss that a little bit later as I continue to learn more. But they are the primary differences, as far as I know, are the Oriental Orthodox churches recognize the fourth ecumenical councils, or the first four ecumenical councils, whereas the Greek and most other Eastern Orthodox churches, or all Eastern Orthodox churches rather, recognize the seven ecumenical councils and are oftentimes referred to as the Church of the Seven Councils. All right. But that is what I did. I went to, I first started going to churches that were the closest to me. And then because they're all within this kind of, because they're all within this kind of radius, right? Um, I finally settled on, after some discussion with people, that, you know, the only difference between these Orthodox churches is basically limited to the geographical region from where the people came that founded the church, right? Like, for example, um, uh, St. Thomas Church, nice people, wonderful community. Um, St. Thomas Orthodox Church is a Romanian Orthodox Church, in that most of the people that founded this church came from Romania. So St. Sava, St. Demetrius, Serbian Orthodox churches, those people predominantly came from Serbia. Uh, Presentation of our Lord, if I'm not mistaken, is a church, Bulgarian Orthodox church. Most of the people came from Bulgaria. So, but the Orthodox Church is the Orthodox Church is the Orthodox Church. And one way that you can look at it is kind of like Irish Catholics versus Italian Catholics versus Catholics in Mexico, right? Like, they're all Roman Catholic, but the experience that you have at a church in Northern Ireland or Ireland is going to be vastly different than the experience that you're going to have at a Catholic church in Mexico. That makes sense, right? Ireland, Mexico. But at the end of the day, you're still going to a Roman Catholic church. That's the differentiation within the Orthodox Church. So, over the past few months, I started focusing on churches that performed divine liturgy, which Romans call, or the Western Rite calls, the Mass, in English, so I could have a better understanding of what's going on. And ultimately, St. George is where I have been attending church lately. It is it, it it is a church that has been, without a doubt, the most welcoming and accepting and beautiful church that I've ever been to. And moreover, the priest lives in my hometown of Medina. And the first time I was there, the I went there early. They have a service before Divine Liturgy called, or Orthos, uh, depending on where you are and uh, which for sect, if for lack of a better term, you're attending. But it's the service before the service, and I like going there because when I am in the church, my cell phone is off. I am completely disconnected from the world, and I think about nothing. Now, before I even talk about how I've stumbled across what I believe is my home church, I will say that every single time, including the first time I attended Divine Liturgy at St. Sava on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, March 13th of last year, I spent almost the entire service weeping, just so emotions were flooding out of me, just flooding, just pouring out of me. And I I couldn't comprehend what was taking place. I was so moved. Now there were times the only other experience I can equate to this were certain aspects of the Roman Catholic Mass from childhood that I found so moving. Oftentimes, and specifically during the Eucharist and the preparation and blessing of the sacraments, right? Um, there was something that I I couldn't put my finger on, but it stirred something in my guts, in my soul. I didn't fully understand what was going on with was with what was going on, um, but something was stirring inside of me, and um, but all of those emotions came to a head when I attended these Orthodox services. Okay, so uh, yeah, so to get a better understanding of what was going on, um, to answer Sean's question, as Sean writes, as a Reformed Protestant, there's no coupling with an ethnicity. Does that make it more challenging to assimilate into the congregation? It depends. Um, in my case, like I said, within some of these Serbian churches that I went to, the entire service was in Old Church Slavonic, and I I had no idea what was going on with the service. I couldn't understand anything, and the majority of the congregation, their native tongue was whatever the native tongue is in Serbia, whether it's Russian or whatever, and many of them spoke English, but it was it was broken English, it was not their native language, and yes, it made it more challenging to assimilate into those congregations, and further discussions with priests or deacons or whoever at churches over time helped me understand that yes, the Orthodox Church is the Orthodox Church is the Orthodox Church, and the only differences within the churches are effectively the geographic locations from where they started, from where the apostles spread out and, you know, formed the church from the beginning of time. And as the churches grew and grew and grew and into different geographic locations, and ultimately the United States came to be, people from these different geographic locations came to different areas of the United States. And in this case, we're talking Northeast Ohio, the Cleveland Akron area, and formed churches that were specific to their own ethnicity. And even though many of them speak English, the services are often performed in Romanian or in Russian or in Bulgarian or in Greek or and it's largely dependent on the church. So Sometimes it's half and half. Like sometimes they'll speak parts of the service in English, parts in Greek, or parts in Russian, or parts in Old Church Slavonic, or whatever. But you know, this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, in terms of assimilation into a different culture, there was one church that I almost didn't go to because, as far as I could tell, and what I've tried to do is keep a very open mind about all of this, because I'm I'm looking for a home. I'm looking for a church home, and I don't know anything about anything. At this point, I've realized I'm so ignorant about so much with regard to faith and my understanding of everything, that all I know is I don't know. So once I reach this point, like, I don't think I'm gonna go to this Antiochian church because, like, the heart of the church is in, like, Lebanon and Syria and like, looks like looks like a lot of the services are in Arabic, and but I noticed that there was a church like right next to the Tremont Farmers Market last year called forget the name of the church, but it was a Syrian Orthodox church, and that fascinated me. And same thing with like the Coptics. Like before, it was like, man, these guys are like Egyptian and Ethiopian, and like, what, like, how am I gonna like fit in there? It's just gonna be weird. So, but I decided, all right, look, man, like, you're trying to find a church home, like, keep an open mind, go check out St. George and see what it's all about. All right. So that's what I decided to do. I decided to go to St. George. And it was this man, Father John, who came and welcomed me during the first service. As he's recognizing some people's birthdays, he asked me to stand, and the whole church turned and welcomed me. And now, mind you, like, the Matin service is like half chanted Arabic and half English. There's an Arabic chanter and an English chanter, and like I just don't get it, like, I'm following along because they give you the sheets. There's like the church bulletin, and then the I don't have one handy, but the matins liturgy, and it's one side of the page is Greek or Bulgarian or Romanian or Russian or Old Church Slavonic, or um, whatever the case may be. The other half of the page is like in English. And so they'll do one section, and it's all like sectioned off. They'll do one section in the native tongue, one section in English, and kind of alternate back and forth. So you can follow along. And but afterward, man, you know, I went to coffee hour and sat down with another priest who he is an English priest, native born English guy, native to the States, and he sat with me and introduced me into like, we talked about all this stuff, and brought me into the library, lent me a bunch of books, just was so welcoming. Everybody else was coming up to me, you know, again, like, half the church is maybe not, I don't know. Like, I've only been there 3 times. I went there again today, but half the church is of Syrian, Lebanese, Jordan, uh, Jordanian, Macedonian. I'm trying to think. Various descents from the Middle East, right? And so they speak English. A lot of people do. A lot of people spend time there. A lot of the old school folks don't because they're first generation here, but their children do. So it's a different culture, right? Like we have like we live in America. We are the epitome of Western culture. We're Western culture on steroids here, in my opinion. But this is not that. Like it's got a different feel. So, um, you know, but nevertheless, at this particular church, St. George, the divine liturgy is spoken in English, and that makes it easy to understand. Now, Father John, the head priest there, is he's got a bit of an accent, but his English is very good. And you know, I went there for the first time on January 29th. They said, "Hey, next week the Metropolitan is coming in, like the big head chief, and you should come and check it out because this doesn't happen very often. Maybe like once a year, once every couple of years." When he makes the rounds, and it's a very intricate, like as if Orthodox services aren't intricate and ornate and very, very different than what we're all accustomed to. Um, it was that to the max. So just to have that experience, I went back and was again blown away at how welcoming everybody was. And then 2 weeks ago, last week, I went to a couple different churches. These guys actually at St. George encouraged me to go to another church that consisted largely of mostly converts. They're like, like you're an English guy, like maybe you're gonna feel more at home there. And I guess it's like a sister church of St. George that they started up in North Royalton. And that church was St. Matthew the Evangelist. Let me see if I can show you a couple pictures of that because now St. Matthew the Evangelist is associated with St. George. It's up here, and I'm down here. St. Matthew the Evangelist is up here, and it too is a cool church. It was one that was transitioned from an older church into what it was. The church went through kind of a tragedy, caught fire several years ago, but yet the icon was not touched by the fire, but the whole surrounding room was. Um, so this particular church is like an offshoot of St. George, and the congregation is largely comprised of converts, right? Um, it's almost strictly English speaking, but yet a lot of the people there are still of Middle Eastern descent somehow. I spoke to a couple people who were Lebanese and said, "Oh man, I just can't. I just I come here because even the Lebanese or the Arabic at uh, these other services is too much for me, and I'm Lebanese." But I got a different feel there. Like it was. I don't want to say that people were cold. People were very nice, but there was just a different kind of approach to the the service. There was a different kind of feel there. And while I was still definitely definitely welcomed there, uh, it was not. I didn't feel at home, and so when I went to so I went back to St. George yesterday. I actually called the priest on Friday to talk about this kind of dilemma that I I I was having, like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to feel. Um, I I and he invited me back. He said, "Hey, look, come back this Sunday. We'll we'll have coffee. I will I'll sit with you and we'll talk about some of this stuff. We'll read the Bible together." And he said, "It's not about the church, right? When you're in the church, you're in the right place. This isn't my church. The church of the people. This is the original church. And we study, like, we seek God, and that's what you're here to do." And he offered to walk me through this. I'll be meeting him next week just to meet him and talk, have coffee, learn about this. Li- like, learn, because after today and after meeting this community of largely Middle Eastern people that I never this was the church that I almost didn't go to because I felt like I was gonna be such an outsider and it would be so weird to me. But I thought, "No, I gotta keep an open mind. I'm gonna go to these different places." Yet this is the one that feels home, that is my home. And I basically have reached a conclusion that first and foremost, as I read a book called The Orthodox Church, a book by Timothy Ware, who details out and outlines the 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 Orthodox Church and the history of it. uh, I'm learning that that you know it is it's what's important to understand is that Timothy Ware was an Episcopalian, was born and raised in the Episcopalian Church and converted to the Orthodox Church. And he has an interesting take on it. And, the book, since its first publication 30 years ago, Timothy Ware's book has become established throughout the English speaking world as the standard introduction to the Orthodox Church. Orthodoxy continues to be a subject of enormous interest among Western Christians, and the author believes that an understanding of its standpoint is necessary before the Roman Catholic and Protestant churches can be reunited. He explains the Orthodox views on such widely ranging matters as ecumenical councils, sacraments, free will, purgatory, the papacy, and the relation between the different Orthodox churches. All right. This brings up something also of great interest to me and something that I've never experienced in any other church before, especially the Roman Catholic Church. Growing up Roman Catholic, I never heard anything, nor did my dad, who went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and St. Xavier University, a Catholic college. Orthodoxy was never really discussed, ever. Whereas the Western Church is frequently discussed in the Orthodox Church. Well, well, routinely, the Orthodox pray for their Western brothers and sisters. They pray for the unification, the reunification of the divided church. They pray that the church comes together as a whole, Catholic, Protestant, all of it. The separation does us no good. We are all children of God, and the Orthodox believe that this is the original church. Um, this is how it began. This is the apostolic church, and I understand that the Nicene Creed is spoken in different churches and different denominations, but there is the inclusion of something called the filioque, and that was a sticking point in the 8th century, um, with regard to certain churches, and was one of the things that led to the schism, which is officially recognized in 1054, which was really just a singular event that occurred when, and I won't get into all of this because, it's outlined in depth in this book. But if you guys are curious, or anybody out there is curious about the Orthodox Church, this is a excellent history book. And the edition that I have is the original edition, but this is um, an updated book. And but Timothy Ware does a wonderful job of detailing out the history of the church, the nature of the schisms, like what happened, why it happened, how it happened. And I find it very interesting that the Orthodox continue to pray for the reunification of the church, period. Whereas the Western church just had never, ever mentioned anything about the Orthodox church at all in my entire schooling of this. And I found that supremely fascinating. Other issues that I had with the Roman Catholic Church was just the acknowledgement of the infallibility of the Pope. I didn't wholly understand that. And the fact that clergy couldn't get married, I always took issue with that. And, up until like the 8th century, 9th century, um, the way that the way the Pope was equal to all of the bishops in all of the various geographical regions that I had previously discussed. He was recognized as the Pope because in Rome, that's where the apostles Peter and Paul were martyred, and Rome held a special place of significance. But up until the 8th, 9th century, with Pope Nicholas, who proclaimed that he himself had authority over all of the churches in all of the world, when it came to these ecumenical councils, no one bishop, and that's what the Pope was, he was a bishop who held the title of Pope, but no one bishop actually had any greater authority than the other. The authority came from, it was a self-proclaimed authority that began with Pope Nicholas in the 9th century, which has subsequently carried on and contributed in large part to the division, which is known as the Great Schism in 1054. But there was a lot of events leading up to that. But again, I don't want to get too much into this because we're almost at 2 hours right now. But nevertheless, I found it extremely interesting that the Orthodox Church prays for the reunification of the churches because they believe that it is, something that is not of any value. And yes, it is largely political, and there's no room for that in the church. And the split between the Western churches, or the split between the church, beginning with the Western church, and then subsequent splits with Protestantism and all the various sects and denominations of that has been just taking what the Catholic, the Western, really, taking what the Romans, the Roman Church did largely in Rome and Italy and throughout the Roman Empire, and then taken that and made additional changes to what the Romans had already done to the church. Because up until the 8th century, there was nothing. There was the church. Just you were Christian, and that's where it ended. You know, so the the whole thing is fascinating to me. My whole interest in Orthodoxy began with the the pastor introducing me to the word theosis and getting my gears grinding about what a true relationship with God actually is. And um, yeah, I continued on this path going to different churches for about 10 months up until the end of January of this year. And it wasn't until I made some other significant life changes towards the end of last year that allowed me to fully understand what it was that I was doing, how I was doing it, and what I needed to do differently in my life to actually encourage and facilitate this environment internally in my heart, in my mind, in my body to allow the spirit to flow through me and provide me the ability to be receptive to that which was always there, but I would closed myself off to. And and that's what that's where I'm at. That is how I found my religion. Um, I believe I've found a home church. I believe that Father John and Father Basil over at St. George are going to walk me through the process of becoming an Orthodox Catholic man. And for a long time, I struggled with that. What would my grandfather think? He was heavily involved in the church where my father was raised. I was heavily involved in the church where my father was raised. My father was heavily involved in the church where he was raised, where my grandfather was. And my grandfather was friends with the bishop, um, Bishop Anthony Pilla here in Cleveland. And, we had deep connections within the Catholic Church. And what what's everybody going to think about it? And I no longer care. I no longer I'm no longer interested in what people think about me. I'm no longer interested in how people judge me. I'm no longer interested in listeners that might be repulsed by my open and warm embrace of my faith. I'm no longer I no longer have any concern about anything because the joy and freedom that I get as a result of deepening this connection with God and having a different understanding of religion and not looking at it as a systematic methodology of control, not unlike government, which is how I viewed it for so long. It is an institution that allows one to cultivate their relationship with God and connect with other people who wish to do the same. Is the Orthodox faith, the only way, the right way. I mean, technically, if we break down what Orthodox means, it's Greek for right doctrine, right practice. It's right for me. Okay. It's right for me. It's the second largest denominator. It's the second largest Christian establishment out there in the world outside of Roman Catholicism. And, you know, besides the inclusion of the filioque, the, uh, the infallibility and the papal claims to authority, it was the Crusades that was really the sticking point that said, that's it. Like the Western church has gone the way the Western church wants to go. The Eastern church stuck with the idea that the way to proceed forward with the teachings of Christ was through peace and not the sword. And when I learned that, I realized that that also made sense with me. So for me personally, being, someone who had, previously so deeply embraced the non-aggression principle, that really resonated with me. All right. Um, and reading Timothy Ware's book about how the Crusades impacted the Eastern churches, that was a dark time in our history as a church. And, you know, I really haven't gotten too much further in the book because I have a specific notebook dedicated to that book so that I can write down all of the questions that I have and discuss this with people as I go along this journey. Because, it's been 3 decades in the making of seeking since I was confirmed at the age of 14 in the 8th grade. Now I'm 45 years old and finally coming around, only to realize that at this point I've been baptized. I've received many of the sacraments. The conversion into the Orthodox faith is really not as complicated as I made it out to be in my head. There's not there does not seem to be this tremendous process to become Orthodox, because the process in and of itself is the action of participation and simply doing the work to learn to become and embrace who it is that we are. And who we are is simple. We're God's children. And for me, this is the next right thing to do. And so I hope that, you know, if I understand that many people out there that may be listening are not inclined to follow or seek out the path that lies within the Orthodox Church. And I appreciate that. And I understand that. And I respect that. I'm not here to try to convert you. I'm not here to proselytize and this is the right way. I just want to encourage you, wherever you are on your path, to keep seeking and keep growing that relationship with God, with Christ, and live a Christ-like life, because that is the only thing, in my humble opinion, that is going to allow us to get beyond the challenges that lie within ourselves, within society, within all of the problems in the world that we face today. If we grow our faith, if we grow with God, and we grow through Christ, then we begin to find solutions to the problems that face us on a daily basis. We find strength to overcome. We find strength in ways that we'd never thought possible. And by the grace of God, I've found a way, after decades of searching, to finally find some peace with that. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Lettie, for the article that inspired me to share this story. I appreciate you guys hanging in there for 2 hours as I went through all of this. And for anybody who did not catch this earlier, um, Lettie's article titled Finding My Religion, which is the title of this show, is linked to in the description below. I would definitely encourage you to check out her article, what she wrote, the articles and resources that she linked to in there. It's all good stuff. No matter where you are on your path, this is all good information to keep in your toolbox. And and if you ever want to talk about any of this, then you are welcome to do so on any of the social medias. You can find All Around Growth everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, but we are most active on Telegram at t.me/allaroundgrowth. I would encourage you to join us there, join the dialogue there. There's a lot of talk about a lot of this, and I welcome more of it because it's brought so much joy to my life. It brings me incredible joy to talk about this with other people, and I'm sincerely grateful for the community that I am a part of, all of the various other communities that we are all a part of, and ultimately the community that we are participating in as people of faith, people who are trying to find their way in a troubled world. So with that, guys, I sincerely appreciate you tuning in, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode, which is going to be titled something, but I don't have those notes right in front of me. So at any rate, we're going to talk about something socially related in the social spheres, because we talked about family last week, we talked spirituality this week, and next week we're going to talk about something social. The week after, we're going to talk about something career. So if you like what you hear, stick around, subscribe to the podcast, All Around Growth, on any podcast players, or just tune in for the live streams, which we will continue to do at 7:30 on Sunday nights until otherwise that changes. So thank you guys very much. Again, I have a lot of gratitude in my heart for all of you, and I appreciate you being here. This is Rob Kaiser, and thank you.
In a world of pain, what can I do? The needs are many and answers a few. People turn away, and I wonder why. If I can help somebody, then I want to try. People may think that it's odd that I believe in friendship and love, and truth is always the best way to the world that may seem odd. I'm an odd fellow. I'm an odd fellow. I'm an odd fellow. If we stand together, we'll never fall. We can make a difference and answer the call. You know the times are wasting every day, and we can help somebody along the way. People may think that it's odd that I believe